are leading the conversation around DEI. You know what DEI is? Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. So I'd like to introduce Yvonne Furneaux, Julia Lachey, and Katie Lapp. So please join me, ladies. Welcome. And I didn't share the reason, the origin why Woman Up is so important and why women leading these conversations are so important. Women make up 60 to 70% of this industry. Yet, they are not at only a fraction of the leadership positions and brokerage positions across the nation. So that's why we wanted to bring these amazing experts, and I want to start with self-introduction. So Yvonne.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming out. My name is Yvonne Furneaux. I'm the Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for Realogy. I've only been with the company for about 6 months, so I'm so excited to be here, my first Inman conference. My career was mostly in corporate communications. I worked for several companies, including Target Corporation. And then over time, I started to feel this passion for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and began to create roles for myself in organizations where DEI didn't exist. So that brings me here to Realogy now, where I'm so excited for the possibilities of how DEI can impact home ownership and entrepreneurship and so many endless possibilities. So that's a bit about me.
So happy to have you.
Thanks.
Julia Lachey.
What Yvonne said. I'm Julia Lachey Israel, and I am the head of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion for Keller Williams. I've named it the head of Inclusion and Belonging, because for me that's incredibly important, and I'm very passionate about people feeling a sense of belonging and growing in communities. I do a lot of training and coaching and consulting about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I have for many years. I've been a licensed real estate broker for 22 years now, and I've been in this space of diversity all that time. And in addition to that, career development, which I quite frankly think are the same thing. Inclusion and belonging, diversity, equity, inclusion, it all helps your business grow. So I see it as both hand in hand, and I am happy to be here. Thank you for having this panel.
Thank you, Julie. And Katie.
Hi, everyone. I'm Katie Lapp. I am CEO of Direct Offer, and I was supposed to be a high-powered paralegal going to court for attorneys, and that didn't happen. My life changed. Later, we're going to talk about a story that's very personal to me, so everyone here is going to be a good friend of mine. My company, Direct Offer, is very focused on building technology that helps young adults gain access to home ownership who have disabilities. And that's a personal story for me. My daughter is high-functioning autistic, and reading's been a problem her whole life, and she needs a reader. So I became very focused on, what we can do to help people who might have learning disabilities or language barriers. How can we break down these barriers? And thank you for having me. That's really where my focus is, and that's what my journey's been for over 20 years. Thank you.
Well, you see why we invited these subject matter experts, and also you'll hear a little bit about their stories because it's hand in hand. And we do talk about research a lot inside the Woman Up movement, and it really is important to know the numbers. Realtors represent every single community in our country, right? And it's so important that we are leading these conversations, and women in particular have a high emotional intelligence. We know the research. We want a diverse table. We bring in another chair, and I would love to hear a little bit of why it's so important to lead these conversations with empathy and grace and some of the skills that women do possess innately. So Yvonne, let's start with you and in your role.
Sure, and in all fairness, there are some men who possess emotional intelligence.
1,000%. We couldn't do this alone, right?
That's right. But, I think we have suffered from this inability to maybe use our voice as much as we could, especially in the corporate space and in the business world. So when I think back to when I was a kid in high school and even early in my career, I would often get told that I was bossy or too assertive or too opinionated. I have a couple of colleagues in the audience who might say that's still the case. But, so early on in my career, I found myself really shrinking, and I didn't speak up when I should have. And I started working in very male-dominated spaces. I worked in manufacturing, and I came to realize that I had to own the power of my voice. And it wasn't that I had to find my voice. I had my voice. My voice was always there, but I had to start using it. And once I started using it, I felt this power in using my voice and the ability to raise my hand, not just to point out what was wrong in an organization, but to raise my hand to lead actual change to make things better. And so when I think about DEI, it's really important for us to think about not just conceptually that these things are important, but we have to actually raise our hands to do the hard work, because it is hard work. Anybody who says otherwise is living in a utopian fantasy. Yeah. The journey to being an inclusive company, the journey to having an equitable society requires intention and it requires work. So I think it's crucial for women to lead in this space because of the lens we have of empathy, particularly when we are trying to lift the voices of those communities that traditionally have been marginalized.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. What about you, Julia?
Very well said. Like you, I too was always told I was bossy and those types of, and loud and, all of those things. And I actually never had a problem speaking up for myself. And to the extent when Facebook first came out, one of the first messages I got was from some random girl. And apparently we were in second grade together. And she found me because she said we were outside somewhere and I spoke up for her and she never forgot me. And so I tend to do that in this space. I'm very passionate about people who maybe don't want to speak up or don't have a voice. So my role has been a little different. I've always been elected. Even to the current position I have now, is a long story about how I came into this role. We have a social equity task force who elected me to serve as the head of inclusion and belonging for Keller Williams. In all of my board positions, I've never been appointed. I was always elected. So for me, when I show up in a space, I don't feel like I'm speaking for myself. I'm representing all of the people who are counting on me to speak up and counting on me to show up and be who I am and represent them and what we all represent. So there's a quote from Maya Angelou that I really like. She says, I come as one, but I stand as 10,000.
I love that.
And so when I come into the room, it is just me, but there are thousands of us that are counting on me to say, hey, no, I don't think we should do it that way. Or have you considered including, or maybe there's a different perspective we could look at. And so for me in that space, it's really important. And because I talk for people even when they don't want me to talk for them, I like to talk. So for me, when I use those innate skills that you talk about, that we may possess, and a lot of skills that I possess, I feel like I'm called to do this work because I possess skills that some people may not have to speak for themselves. Thick skin, for one. Okay? Yeah. It is not easy space. People do stuff and say stuff, and I'm just like, that's okay. You forgot to invite us. No problem. We brought our chair, and we're just going to sit right here. It's okay, And you just have to have that thick skin in this space. So for me, I feel like raising my hand is saying that there's a whole bunch of people that have something to say, and hopefully I'm articulate enough to deliver the message that all 10,000 of us have. And so that's how I share that.
Julia. Yeah. Well, and I think what you said, I want to kind of echo it because it flips the purpose, right? When you take yourself out of it and you are serving your community, you're doing this for a purpose, and that's beautiful. I just wanted to acknowledge that. All right, Katie.
That was wonderful. You guys are amazing. So before I go into my story, I want to give you guys a couple takeaways. When Martin Luther King gave his speech, there were 200,000 people that showed up. We did not have internet. We did not have cell phones.
We didn't have videos.
We didn't have this. These were people that individually made a decision for change. Yeah. And, that's just something to sink in.
Yep.
Also, when you go to a restaurant, what do they ask you? Do you have any food allergies? So as agents, when we are showing a home, we need to start asking, do you have any limitations? That way we know if somebody's going to pull up in a wheelchair. That way we know whether somebody, has a visual disability or a hearing disability. So if we just start asking the same question that they do commonly in a restaurant, but just change the word to, do you have any limitations? So those are my 2 giveaways. I hope that's helpful. So like I said, I was supposed to be a high-powered paralegal. I graduated from Memphis, University of Memphis, with a degree through the Tennessee Bar. And then my life got derailed. At one point in all of our lives, we're all going to need help. We are all going to have a disability. We're all going to get old. It's going to happen. So, and that happened to my daughter at 2. And she had a severe allergic reaction, suddenly became paralyzed, and I knew immediately I was not going to be a high-powered paralegal. I was going to be a stay-at-home mom taking care of a disabled daughter. Now, my mother was a single mother in real estate. I grew up, we lived paycheck to paycheck. She was a hard worker, and she was a fantastic agent. So what I wanted to do was go back to what I knew, my community. I started a little real estate magazine, and the real estate community came out and bought ads in it so I could stay home with my daughter. Now, I didn't ask for pity. I said, I'm going to work hard for you. So what I have to say to this room is thank you. Because of you, I got to put my daughter in therapy. Because of you, I got to get my daughter to the point where she could walk, and now she's in college as a regular student. Because of you. So now she wants to have a husband at some point, and a house, and a baby, and a dog, probably a lot of dogs. And so we start looking online at homes, and she knows what I do for a living, and she started to get frustrated because she can't read. She has a reader at college. And I thought, I'm going to devote my life to give back to this industry to help you, give you tools to help people with disabilities to communicate with those people with disabilities. It's important. So we have to think beyond reading. We have to think about audio. We have to think about sensories. We have to think about what we write. When you write an MLS description, if you use acronyms, even if you abbreviate BR for bedroom, doesn't mean they're going to understand what that is. I'm not saying dumb down your language, I'm saying simplify it.
And that's a powerful reminder that we serve so many different neurodivergent people from every background. When I go back to each and every community, we represent as realtors, as being in the real estate industry, bringing them home, right? So that's a really important piece. And I did want to dig into something, so we'll get back to you, I promise.
I'm a talker.
But I did want to dig into something you touched on, Yvonne, and that is advocacy and allyship. We were just having this conversation in the green room about sponsorship, and that is making sure that we speak up the women and the people in our lives when we're not in the room, right? Or the people that we want to include and the people that need to feel the belonging. So Yvonne, I know you are self-proclaimed diversity disruptor, and I do want to say that Woman Up is a really great example of how we stand up for each other and we provide the role models on our stages, and thank you, Inman, for this, but it's really about the stories and the why behind what we do. So tell us a little bit about what the diversity disruptor is.
Sure. So hopefully I've earned the title so I can proclaim it. But being a disruptor can sound very daunting. You know, it can sound like, oh, I need to, change housing policy in this country to gain. And that's all great. We do need to advocate for that and work for that.
Sure.
But all of us as individuals have the power to be a disruptor in any moment where we see bias, whether conscious or intentional, that's creeping up either within ourselves or in others. Yeah. So I'll give you a simple example. You're in a room and you're talking about bringing in a new agent to your office who works at a different brokerage right now. And the conversation around the table is around whether or not this person is quote unquote professional. All right, maybe they have funky red hair, maybe they have tattoos, whatever it may be. That's a moment that you can stop yourself in your tracks and others and say, what do I even mean by that word, professional? What's the image I have in my head of that word? Does that image portray a certain visual representation, maybe a man in a suit, something like that? And is this person going to do their job any better or worse because they have a tattoo or have funky hair or whatever it may be? I love Giselle, who was up here earlier in her leather pants. I'm totally jealous. So those are and we have these conceptions in our minds of certain things, and we are attracted to people who are like us, for example. Mm-hmm. That's a moment in time that anybody can do to stop and say, are we being biased? Are we perceiving something that's not there? Are we judging something on their appearance, or are we judging a person on anything other than their skills, experience, and potential? That's an example of where a bias can be creeping in, that you as a disruptor can be in the room and say, you know what, let's reframe this conversation and not fall into that blind spot that we so easily can. So my point being that you can be a disruptor in very simple ways, that it doesn't have to mean that we're overhauling a whole system, although we'll get there.
I love that you talked about reframing, right? And it's not, a lot of it is implicit, right? We
That's
don't
right.
see it. Right. And it's a gift that you call out for that person, because then they now understand and are educated on whatever it was, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so Julia has a wonderful story about the power of community, right? And we can do this in terms of this community here, but in your community where you are a realtor and DEI officer for Keller, you really leaned on your community so many times. I know there's many times, but do you want to share a little bit about how the power that community brings?
Sure. So, when she said, would you share your story about, how the community lifted you up? I said, which time? What time are we talking about? There's so many. And then we were referencing my son. And like you, I had a situation that totally turned my entire life upside down. I was in the middle of advancing to a different role. I was moving to Texas, which is where our headquarters are at Keller Williams. And my son had come home from college, and he came home and he had a pain in his leg. He was going to be helping me drive my truck down to Texas. Long story short, my house was totally empty. I was moving. Like, the stuff was gone. The movers were gone. Everything was gone. And his pain went from 0 to 10 in one day, and took him to the emergency room. And the child had stage 4 cancer, 20 years old. And I have no idea how long he had it. He was gone to school and college, and came home, and literally from that day, never walked again. And he became disabled. And so we left my house to find, before we even left the house, I was in the house again with no furniture at all, and the real estate community. So I always tell people, I love real estate, I love real estate agents, and sometimes I like clients. But most of the time, I love real estate agents. I am a huge advocate for the real estate community. So the community, other agents in our area, certainly Keller Williams and all of the people that worked at my office, our stagers showed up with furniture. Wow. Furniture, dishes, TVs, microwaves, everything. Unfortunately, we couldn't stay in my house because my son couldn't do the stairs. We had stairs in the front and in the back, and I had to take him to radiation every day. And so we moved out and got an apartment, and when I was going to sign all the paperwork, the man said, now, did the lady upstairs tell you about this? And the lady upstairs was actually another lady from my real estate office. And I said, no. And he said, oh, they paid for it. Like all of it? Paid for it. And they continued to pay for it. I stayed and cared for my son 24 hours a day for 4 months until he passed. And I never worked. I never paid a dime for anything. And really it was the other, like you mentioned, we're talking about Women Up. It was the other women who held me up, literally, in order to even be able to maintain. And they took care of, I had sold houses I didn't even know I listed. I didn't even know. Wow. I didn't even know. And allowed me the opportunity to still go to Texas and be in the role that I'm in now, simply because of the support. And so we do make a lot of money in real estate, and I forget that sometimes. I think because we're around each other and we're what we know, that we kind of make a lot of money in this thing. And then, like someone said recently, what do you do with it, though? And are there other people? So I feel like those people who poured into me at that time are, of course, helping me pour into the thousands of other people that we represent, the 10,000 I speak of. It's a paying it forward type of thing, but so many times the community has supported me in all the things that we do, and I would not be anywhere near where I am right now without the support of the real estate community, and particularly the people at Keller Williams who made sure that I had a need for nothing.
That is really beautiful. So first of all, thank you for sharing.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thank you for asking.
That is a powerful story of how we can change our community, right? We can lead these discussions. We can be vulnerable and honest and really lead in this space. So thank you.
Sarah, can I add something to that? Because I love that both of these women have shared their very personal stories about their families. And it's a great reminder that, we often think of diversity, equity, and inclusion to be around race, ethnicity, gender, maybe sexual orientation. But we start to understand that when we truly become inclusive, we are talking about all kinds of life circumstances and situations that people need help at certain points in their lives, or they're shaped by different aspects of their identity that go beyond race, gender, sexual orientation. I also was raised by a single mom. I was a single mom myself for many years. So anyway, it's just a really good reminder for everybody in the room that when we have these conversations around DEI, we are not just talking about race, gender, and orientation. It goes so much further than that.
I thank you for that, because that's so true. And that kind of leads into Katie, because your whole being is about people with disabilities, right? Absolutely. And you created your company based on this. So do you want to finish sharing, please?
I'm about to cry. I'm sorry that it's, boy, wow. Yeah.
So you created you created it because you saw a need in the community.
There's a need. There's an absolute need. Just because somebody has a disability doesn't mean they can't have home ownership.
Yep.
And it starts with us to open those doors, and we're ready now. I mean, you guys got this. It's not nobody's looking for a grand gesture. It's the little things. The very little things. It's walking into a room and looking at the room, not just walking into the room, and really seeing the room. And understanding that people with disabilities are sometimes your best employees, the most productive people for society. With my daughter's autism, kind of fun story, we were at a fair one time and she wanted to learn how to play violin. And some guy said, I've got one in my car. Do you want her to play with it? He was with a quartet. So we got the three-quarter violin. She was 11 years old, and gave it to my daughter. 2 hours later, my friends were walking into this gallery where the quartet was, and my daughter, and people were asking, how long has she played for? I'm like, a couple hours. That good. She just got it. If everyone has something they're exceptionally good at, whether they have a disability or not. And we all do, to an extent, have some form of a disability. So, it just starts with us.
I love it. All right, we are pretty much out of time. So if you give a quick takeaway, what you want the audience to take away. We'll start with you, Katie.
Well, my mother taught me that when you start viewing the world and everything in it as a beautiful miracle with all of its imperfections, the world opens up to you. And thank you so much for Women Up, for having me. This is an honor. Thank you, Inman. I'm blessed to be on this stage, and I am honored to be able to speak to you today. Thank you.
Thank you. Wait, two more. Julie, quick, what's
the last thing I would leave this audience with is to diversify your teams. And whether you own a brokerage or whether your team is your home inspector, the person who does the lawn care, the lender, whatever that is, diversify those teams and not just with racial diversity,
Right.
but like you're mentioning, people have so many different perspectives to offer, so many different skills and tools that come from the individuality of who we are. And so when you diversify your team and all those different perspectives get around your business, you can reach so many more people. I like to say we don't want to just do business with some of the market, we want all of the market. And the best way to reach a diverse audience is to have a diverse team.
1,000%.
Really quickly, so you mentioned this concept of being a sponsor and an advocate versus a mentor. So for the women in the room, the studies show we are over-mentored and under-sponsored. So we could have 1 million mentors that are giving us advice, but what we need are sponsors, and that's the person who has a seat at the table, who's going to speak about you and carry your water or wear your t-shirt, whatever you want to say, when you are not in the room. Find yourself those people who are going to help advocate for you. And know your own power, that you have a seat at the table yourself, and there is somebody else who wants a seat at your table. So if you have risen up, let's take this as an opportunity and a responsibility to reach back down and bring the elevator up for other women who want a seat at your table too.
Preach it, girl. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you.